Please, just buy the shop. I need the money to send my sister abroad.
The words came out before Namsa could stop them, raw and graceless. Nothing like the composed negotiation she had rehearsed in the mirror that morning while her hands shook and her reflection looked back at her with eyes that had not slept properly in 6 days. Mr. Dlamini, the property broker with the gold tooth and the permanent expression of a man who smelled opportunity on desperate people, leaned back in his leather chair and laced his fingers together across his belly like a man settling in for a feast. "How much are you asking?" "Whatever is fair," Namsa said, which was the worst thing she could have said, and she knew at the moment his gold tooth caught the light as he smiled. She had opened that shop at 23 years old with borrowed money, a borrowed table, and a stubbornness that her mother used to call yukazafatha, carrying yourself with dignity when life gives you every reason not to. The sign above the door read Namsa's Treasures, painted in yellow and green by her own hand on a Saturday afternoon, while Bizasib sat on an upturned crate eating a mango and offering absolutely no help whatsoever. "You missed a spot," Bizasib had said, pointing with the mango. "Then come and fix it." "I would, but I don't want to." That was Bizasib at 15, honest to the point of being alarming. And somehow you could never stay angry at her, because she would look at you with those enormous eyes of hers and tilt her head slightly, like a very beautiful and completely unbothered cat. Namsa was 31 now, and the shop had survived 8 years of load shedding, 2 floods that soaked half her stock, 1 attempted robbery that she had personally foiled by screaming so loudly the man dropped his bag and ran,
Why is this
and the
happening
kind
to
of
me?
daily financial anxiety that sits on your chest before you even open your eyes in the morning. She sold fabrics, beaded jewelry, hand-stitched bags, and little carved wooden figurines that tourists photographed more than they bought, which was a betrayal she had made peace with. The shop was small, yes, and it smelled permanently of the cedar oil she used to treat the shelves, and the ceiling fan wobbled in a way that suggested it was considering resigning. But it was hers, and everything that word carries when you have built something from nothing using only your hands and your nerve. Their parents had died 4 years apart, their father first, a quiet man who drove a delivery truck and brought home fruit on Fridays, and then their mother, Mama Dubé, who was not quiet at all, who sang while she cooked and argued with the television news, and once chased a debt collector off her front step with a wooden spoon and no apology. When Mama Dubé died, she left behind a small piece of land on the edge of the city, a worn Bible, 3 good pots, and 2 daughters who had only each other. Namsa was 26. Bizasai was 18 and had just failed her second attempt at her school leaving exams, which she described as the exam's fault, specifically. "I'm not stupid," Bizasai had said firmly, sitting at the kitchen table with the results letter face down as though she was refusing to acknowledge it. "The questions were just designed against my particular type of intelligence." "And what type is that?" "Practical. Experiential. The kind that doesn't need to know the square root of anything." Namsa had put the letter in a drawer and made them both tea and said nothing, because sometimes love is knowing when silence is kinder than the truth, and also because she was fairly certain Bizasai was not entirely wrong about herself, just entirely wrong about exams being optional. The years that followed were not cruel exactly, but they were the kind of years that lean on you, steady, heavy, relentless, until you forget what it felt like to stand fully upright. Namsa worked 6 days a week, and sometimes the 7th when a market event came through. She kept the rent paid, kept food in the kitchen, kept the lights on, kept her sister clothed and fed, and generally pointed in the direction of the future. Bizasai, for her part, tried various things. A short course in hair and beauty that she abandoned when she discovered the hours were early. A brief ambition to become an influencer that produced 47 followers and 1 viral video of her burning toast. And a 6-month stint helping at a neighbor's tailoring shop that ended when the neighbor and Bizasib discovered, simultaneously, that Bizasib had strong opinions about hemlines and no intention of keeping them to herself. She was not lazy, exactly. She was more like a river that hadn't found its channel yet, full of energy and movement, going in 17 directions at once, looking for the one place where all of it would finally make sense. And then, on a Tuesday in March, while Namsa was pricing a new batch of beaded necklaces and Bizasai was sitting on the counter she had been told not to sit on, eating providas from the packet and scrolling her phone, Bizasai said, very casually, as though the thought had simply drifted through the window, "I think you should send me to England."
I think you have been in the sun too much.
Namsa looked up from the necklaces. "I think," she said slowly, "that you've been in the sun too long." But Bizasai put the phone down and looked at her sister with that particular expression she deployed on significant occasions. Not the unbothered cat look, something older and more serious than that, something that reminded Namsa uncomfortably of their mother, and said, "Cece, I'm serious. There's
But over
nothing
there,
for me
Bo,
here.
nursing programs,
I've
caregiver
tried.
jobs, actual
You know I've
opportunities that
tried.
pay actual money.
But over
What?
there, nursing programs, caregiver jobs, actual opportunities that pay actual money. I could send you back more in 3 months than the shop makes in a year. I could change both our lives. And how exactly do you plan to get there?" Bizasai picked up a Pro Vita, examined it thoughtfully, and said, "That part one was hoping you could assist with." Namsa said no, obviously, because no was the sensible answer, no was the responsible answer. No was the answer that did not involve financial ruin, and she said it clearly and completely, and without any room for negotiation, and Bizasai accepted it with a dignified nod. For approximately 4 days. After which began what Namsa would later describe to anyone who would listen as the campaign, conducted with the patience and precision of someone who had studied their opponent their entire life and knew exactly which angles to approach from and in what order. It began with cooking. Bizasai, who cooked roughly twice a year, began making
and only
dinner
under
every
duress.
evening, proper dinners, the kind with sides. Then came the back rubs, unprompted, while Namsa sat tallying the week's numbers. Then the shop. Bizasai started coming in to help, actually help, tidying stock and talking to customers with a warmth and easy charm that made people buy things they had not come in intending to buy, which Namsa noted with deep suspicion and grudging admiration. And then one evening, Bizasai brought out a folder. A folder with printed pages inside it. Visa requirements, nursing aid training programs in Birmingham, average salary figures, cost of a flight, timeline projections. All of it organized into sections with little colored tabs, which was so unlike Bizasai that Namsa sat down involuntarily. "You made tabs," Namsa said. "I made tabs," Bizasai confirmed, clearly as surprised as anyone. Namsa looked through the folder for a long time while Bizasai sat across from her and, in an act of restraint that cost her enormously, said absolutely nothing. When Namsa finally closed it and looked up, her sister's face was doing everything it could to hold itself steady, and underneath all that carefully maintained hope was something Namsa recognized because she had felt it herself every morning for 5 years. The exhaustion of wanting a life and not knowing how to reach it. "I only have the shop," Namsa said quietly, "and Mama's land, and my jewelry." "I know," Bizasai said. "That's everything, Busi. If I sell those things, I know what I'm asking you." Silence settled between them, thick and honest, the way silence only gets between people who have no performances left to give each other. And then Namsa breathed in slowly through her nose, the way their mother used to do before she made a decision she knew would cost her something, and said, "You swear to me. On Mama's grave, you swear to me." Bizasai crossed the small kitchen in 2 steps and took both her sister's hands in hers, and her voice when she spoke did not waver at all. "On Mama's grave, Cece. Every month. I will never forget." So there Namsa sat, in Mr. Dlamini's office, with his gold tooth and his leather chair and his full awareness of exactly what her desperation was worth in rands, selling a shop that had taken 8 years to build for a number that made something behind her eyes burn, because she had looked at her sister's face and been unable to look away. She sold the jewelry too, each piece going to a different buyer. The beaded sets her mother had worn to church, the thin gold bracelet that had lived on her wrist so long she had forgotten the weight of it until it was gone. She sold Mama's land last, because that one required her to sit in a different office and sign a different set of papers and smile at a man in a suit who talked about market value, while Namsa thought about the way her mother had stood on that ground and called it ours. She signed anyway, with a steady hand that cost her everything she had. The airport was loud and vast, and completely indifferent to the fact that Namsa Dubé was leaving it with less than she had arrived with in every possible sense. Bizasai's bags were checked, her documents were in order, her new coat, purchased from some of the remaining money, because Birmingham was cold and Bizasai had never owned a coat, made her look startlingly grown-up, like someone's future had arrived early and was already dressed for it. At the gate, Bizasai hugged her so tightly that Namsa felt it in her spine, and she smelled of the same shea butter she had been using since she was 16, and Namsa pressed her face into her sister's shoulder for a moment longer than was dignified and didn't care even slightly. "Every month," Bizasai whispered. "Every month," Namsa whispered back. She watched her sister walk through the gate without looking back. Bizasai never looked back. It wasn't in her nature, she was already in motion, and Namsa stood there until the doors closed and the corridor was empty, and a cleaner arrived with a mop and gave her a look that was not entirely without sympathy. Then she gathered her bag, walked out of the airport, and went home to a house that had her name on the lease and nothing else left inside it, and sat down on the kitchen floor in her coat because she hadn't thought to turn the heat on, and allowed herself, very privately, 3 minutes of crying before she stopped, blew her nose, and said aloud to no one, with a firmness that surprised even her, "She's going to be fine." She said it like she meant it. She almost did. The calls started beautifully. Bizisai rang every single day for the first 2 weeks, sometimes twice, calling at odd hours because she had not yet figured out the time difference and did not particularly care to, which meant Namsa's phone would light up at midnight or 5 in the morning with her sister's face on the screen, and Namsa would answer every single time, sitting up in the dark of her rented room. One room, one window. A landlord named Mr. Peterson who communicated exclusively through notes slipped under the door, and she would listen to Bizisai talk about London with the breathless energy of someone who had just discovered that the world was larger than they thought. Cece, the trains go underground, like actually under the ground, and nobody thinks it's strange. Everyone just sits there reading like they are not currently beneath a city. Busi, it is 2 in the morning. And the supermarkets are open at midnight. Cece, midnight. I bought yogurt at midnight just because I could. Namsa would lie back against her thin pillow, staring at the ceiling with its water stain shaped vaguely like a boot, and she would smile in the dark where nobody could see it, because her sister's voice sounded like possibility, and possibility, even secondhand, even at 2 in the morning, was worth staying awake for. She had 3 days to vacate the house she had grown up in. Mr. Peterson's notes had made this very clear, in the neat handwriting of a man who enjoyed penmanship, and she had debts that sat on her chest every morning like something with weight and intention. But she had Bizisai's voice on the phone saying, "I will sort you out the moment I get a job. Cece, first paycheck, I promise, on Mama's grave," and she held on to that the way her mother had held on to that plot of land, not because it was practical, but because it was something to stand on. The calls slowed in month 2. Not dramatically, not in a way that announced itself, just quietly, the way water drains from a bath. One moment it is there, warm and present, and then you look up and it is mostly gone, and you cannot say exactly when it happened. Every other day became every few days, became once a week, became Namsa staring at her phone on a Sunday evening pressing call and listening to it ring out, then pressing call again, because surely the first time was just bad signal, and the second time was also just bad signal, and by the 4th time she had stopped pretending it was the signal. She left voice notes. Cheerful ones at first, careful not to sound worried, because she did not want Bizisai to feel pressured, did not want to be the heavy thing dragging at her sister's new life. So she kept her voice light and bright, and said things like, "Just checking in. Hope you are well. No rush. Call when you can." And she sounded so breezy and unbothered that she almost convinced herself. Then the voice notes became less cheerful, more honest, shorter. "Busi, please just let me know you are okay. Busi, the landlord is asking questions I do not have answers to. Busi, I borrowed money from Mrs. Dlamini next door for food, and she did not say anything unkind about it, but she looked at me in a way I would very much like to not be looked at again. Busi, please." The room Namsa was living in was small in the way that makes you aware of your own body, aware that you take up space, that your elbows exist, that breathing requires a certain amount of room that this particular space was not entirely willing to give. It had a single bed, a small table, a hot plate that worked on its own schedule, and a window that looked out onto a wall, which was perhaps the most honest view she had ever had. Just a wall, just the plain fact of an obstacle, no sky, no softness, no pretending. She ate when the neighbors let her, which they did more often than she deserved and less often than she needed, and she ate without complaint and without excessive gratitude because she had learned early that both extremes make people uncomfortable, and the neighbors were already doing her a kindness, so the least she could do was receive it gracefully. Mrs. Osei from 2 doors down brought her jollof rice on Thursdays and never mentioned it afterward, never brought it up, never made Namsa feel the weight of it, just knocked, handed over the container, and left, which was the most dignified form of charity Namsa had ever experienced. And she thought about it often, about how much grace it takes to give someone something without making them feel small for needing it. She thought about her mother. She thought about the land. She did not let herself think about Bizisai, because thinking about Bizisai led to a place she was not ready to go yet. The truth arrived on a Wednesday, delivered by a woman named Thandika, who was a mutual friend, who had a cousin in London, who had seen Betrayal at a restaurant in Kensington, Namsa, the fancy part, sitting across from a man in a suit that cost more than a car, laughing the way people laugh when they have decided that their past is a country they no longer live in. Thandika sat across from Namsa in a plastic chair and delivered this information with the careful expression of someone who knows they are about to cause damage and has decided that the kindness is in the speed, not the softness. She has a new number, Thandika said. Nobody has the new one. She gave it only to certain people. Namsa nodded. And her boyfriend is apparently very wealthy, some kind of property investor. She has been with him since month 2. Namsa nodded again, because nodding required less of her than speaking did at this particular moment. There is something else. Thandika paused, and in that pause Namsa felt the specific quality of a silence that is carrying something it doesn't want to put down. People are saying, and I am only telling you because I would want to know, people are saying she has been telling her new friends that she has no family back home, that she is alone, that there is nobody. The room did not move. The plastic chair did not move. Namsa's face did not move. Everything inside her, however, moved all at once, shifted and cracked and rearranged itself into something she did not yet have a name for, something that lived in the same neighborhood as grief, but was not grief, something angrier and more bewildered, the feeling of looking for something you put down in a safe place and finding the safe place empty. "Thank you for telling me," she said, and her voice came out steady, which surprised her, because nothing else was. She booked the flight on her last savings, the small amount she had been keeping at the bottom of a zippered pocket of her bag, the emergency money, the do-not-touch money, the money she had been treating like a last resort, and she supposed this was, in fact, a last resort, so she unzipped the pocket and she used it, and she told herself she would figure out the rest when she landed, which was the kind of plan that is not really a plan, but is the only thing available when you have run out of alternatives. She packed one bag, a small one, because she intended to sort this out quickly, to find her sister, to look her in the face, to hear from her own mouth what was happening and why, and then to come home with either an explanation or a resolution. Because she was not a woman who could live with an unanswered question this large. It would eat her from the inside out, and she had too many other things trying to eat her from the inside out already. She could not afford another one. London in February is the kind of cold that is not dramatic about it, not the bold, biting cold of somewhere that commits to the bit, just a persistent gray, damp cold that gets into your clothes and stays there, that makes you feel slightly damp even when you are dry, that sits in your bones with the quiet confidence of something that knows it is winning. Namsa stood outside Heathrow with her one small bag and £53 in her pocket, which had seemed like a reasonable amount until she looked at the prices on the taxi board outside arrivals and understood immediately that it was not. And she stood there in the gray February air, and she did what she had always done when things were worse than expected. She assessed. She calculated. She adapted. A bus was cheaper than a taxi, so she took a bus, and then another bus, watching the city scroll past the window with an expression she kept carefully neutral because the man next to her was already staring, and she was not going to give him anything else to look at. She had an address. Thandika's cousin had given it to her. The address of the neighborhood Bizisime had been seen in, not the exact flat, not the building, just the area, which was the kind of information that is technically better than nothing, but not by a measurable amount. The hotels were not possible. She looked at her £53, and she looked at the prices on her phone screen, and she put her phone back in her pocket. She found a bridge the way you find things when you are desperate, which is to say not by looking but by running out of other options, and she sat under it the first night with her bag between her feet and her back against the stone, and she told herself it was temporary, which it was, and she told herself she had survived worse, which she had, and she told herself her mother would not want her to fall apart here on a pavement in a foreign country, which was true, and also the only thing that got her through the night. 7 nights she slept there, in the cold and the damp, in the city that her sister had come to for a better life, eating from charity food vans staffed by kind volunteers who never asked questions, and she spent her days moving through the neighborhood like water finding a crack, showing Bizisibe's photo on her phone to shopkeepers and doormen and other Africans she spotted on the street, who looked at the photo and sometimes shook their heads and sometimes paused in a way that told her she was getting warmer. She found her on a Saturday evening, not through any clever plan, not through strategy, but through the specific stubbornness that had kept her alive since she was 19 years old, the refusal to stop moving, and through a Nigerian woman named Blessing who worked the coat check at a private members club in Chelsea and who looked at Bizisaib's photo and said very quietly, "She comes here on Saturdays, with the tall man, they arrive around 8. Namsa was outside by 7:30, in her one set of clothes, in the February cold, with no plan beyond I need to see her face. The guests arriving around her were dressed in that particular way that money dresses. Not loudly, not obviously, just in fabrics that hung differently, in shoes that reflected the light in a way cheaper shoes do not. And Namsa stood among them like a comma in the wrong sentence, but she stood because she had not come this far to step aside. Bizisaib arrived at 8:12. Namsa saw her before she saw her laugh first, that specific laugh she had inherited from their mother, the one that started in the chest and arrived late to the face, and something in Namsa's body responded to it before her brain could intervene, some deep animal recognition, the bones knowing what the mind was still processing. Bizisaib was wearing a green dress that Namsa did not recognize, her hair done in a way that was beautiful and expensive and entirely unlike the girl who used to sit on the kitchen floor on Sunday evenings to get it braided. And she was holding the arm of a tall man with gray at his temples who looked at her the way men look at things they have paid for and are pleased with, and she was laughing at something he had said, and she looked, if Namsa was being brutal with herself, genuinely happy. That was the worst part, actually. Boosie. Bizisaib's laugh stopped. She turned slowly, in the way people turn when they have heard something they were hoping they did not hear, and her eyes found Namsa in the crowd, and for one fraction of 1 second, one single unguarded moment, Namsa saw it, saw the recognition, saw the flash of something that might have been shame or guilt or the ghost of the sister she used to be. And then it was gone, sealed over, smooth as paint on a wall. Bizisaib's expression rearranged itself into polite confusion. "I'm sorry," she said, and her accent had changed, rounded itself at the edges, softened its consonants, become the kind of accent that is not from anywhere specific, but is not from there either. "Do I know you?" The tall man turned to look at Namsa with the mild curiosity of someone looking at a slight inconvenience. The people nearby shifted in that subtle way that people shift when they sense that something uncomfortable is about to happen in their vicinity. Namsa looked at her sister's face, the face she had braided hair behind, the face she had checked under beds for, the face she had sold everything she owned to send to this city, and she said very quietly, "Boosie, don't." Something moved behind Bizisaib's eyes. Something that knew exactly what it was doing, and had decided to do it anyway, which is a different and more terrible thing than not knowing. She turned to the security guard standing by the entrance, and she murmured something, low and quick, and the guard, a large man who had the energy of someone who did not make the rules but enforced them with genuine enthusiasm, moved toward Namsa with his hand already extended. "Miss, I'm going to have to ask you to. I am her sister." Namsa said it to the guard, but she said it loud enough for everyone to hear, loud enough for Bizisaib to hear, loud enough that the nearby conversations stumbled and paused. "I sold everything I owned to put her on that plane. I slept under a bridge for 7 nights to find her. I am her sister." The crowd was very quiet now. Bizisaib did not turn around. That was the thing that Namsa would carry with her long after everything else. Not the fancy dress, not the changed accent, not the murmured word to the security guard, but the back of, perfectly still, while the man put his hand on Namsa's arm and walked her firmly toward the door, and the back of Bizisaib's head did not turn, not once, not even slightly, and the green dress did not move, and the tall man said something that made Bizisaib laugh again, quieter this time, and she laughed. The door closed behind Namsa with a soft, expensive sound. She stood on the pavement in the February cold, with her one bag at her feet and the sound of her own breathing, and the city moved around her the way cities do, indifferent, enormous, entirely unconcerned, and she stood there until she was sure her legs would hold her, and then she picked up her bag, and she started walking. She had nowhere to go. The shoes were the first to go. Namsa had walked 6 blocks in heels that were never meant for pavement, and somewhere between the 3rd and 4th traffic light, her left ankle simply gave up the argument, folding beneath her like a chair with one leg missing, sending her straight down onto the cold Johannesburg sidewalk outside the venue where, just an hour ago, her sister had looked through her like she was a smudge on a window. She sat there on the ground, her good dress pooling around her, her handbag clutched to her chest, and she thought, very seriously, about just staying there forever. The hunger was the worst of it, because hunger had a way of making everything else louder, the humiliation sharper, the cold more bitter, the truth of the evening impossible to argue with. She had not eaten since the small bread roll she'd saved from breakfast, telling herself she would eat properly once she found Byzasheim, once things were sorted, once. And now here she sat on a Johannesburg pavement at 9:30 at night, with nothing sorted and nothing to eat and nobody who knew her name within 500 kilometers. You know, most people sit on benches. She looked up. The man standing over her was tall, dressed in a suit that had not been purchased off any rack she had ever seen in her life, holding 2 polystyrene cups of something that was steaming in the night air. He was perhaps 50, with a round, pleasant face and the kind of calm eyes that suggested he had seen many things and been alarmed by very few of them. "I prefer the ground," Namsa said, because she was too exhausted to be embarrassed anymore. "More honest down here." The corner of his mouth moved. Fair enough. He crouched down to her level rather than standing over her, which she noticed, and held out one of the cups. "It's just tea. From the shack on the corner. Nothing fancy." She looked at the cup, then at him, then back at the cup, doing the rapid calculation every woman does when a strange man offers her something in the dark. He seemed to read her mind. "I'm Deli Adeyemi. I was at the dinner inside, and I stepped out for air and watched you fall. I've been standing here trying to decide if offering help would be offensive or welcome." He paused. "I'm still not entirely sure." "Tea is welcome," Namsa said, and took the cup. It was hot and too sweet and absolutely perfect, and she felt her entire body sigh as it went down. "Are you hurt?" Deli asked, settling himself onto the pavement beside her with the ease of a man who had long stopped caring what things looked like. "My ankle. My pride. Several other things." She wrapped both hands around the cup. "My name is Namsa. My sister is at the dinner you just left. She pretended not to know me." Deli was quiet for a moment. "The woman in the green dress?" "Byzasheim Dlamini." Namsa turned to look at him. "You know her?" "I know of her," he said carefully, in the way people speak when what they actually mean is something less polite. "She has been moving in certain circles for the past 8 months. Presenting herself as a self-made businesswoman from Johannesburg. Family money, she says. Import-export background." He paused again. "I always found the details a little thin." Namsa laughed, and it came out slightly broken at the edges. "She grew up in the same 2-bedroom house I did in Cape Town. Our mother cleaned other people's floors. Byzasheim's business background is watching me run a catering company I built with my own 2 hands, from scratch, while she told me I was wasting my potential." Deli said nothing for a long moment, and then he said, "Ah." Just that. One syllable, carrying the weight of full understanding. What happened next moved the way disasters always do, not slowly and with warning, but all at once, the way a glass falls off a table, and by the time your hand reaches out it is already too late and already broken. Deli helped Namsa to her feet, walked her inside, and sat her down at a table near the back, where someone brought her a plate of food that she ate without speaking for 4 full minutes, because she was a human being with a body that had needs, and those needs were not going to wait for the drama to resolve itself first. And then Deli, who it turned out was the evening's keynote speaker and a man whose name carried real weight in that room, walked to the front, greeted the table where Byzasheim was seated with her boyfriend and his colleagues, and said conversationally to the man beside her, "James, I couldn't help noticing your guest. I understand she's in import-export, based in Johannesburg." Byzasheim went very still. "That's right," James said proudly, his hand finding the small of her back. "Built her business entirely herself. Remarkable woman." Deli tilted his head pleasantly. "I only ask because I was just outside speaking to someone who seems to know her quite well. Family, I believe." Byzasheim stood up so quickly her chair scraped back against the floor, and every head at the table turned, and she said, "Deli, I can explain," which was precisely the wrong thing to say, because James had not yet been told there was anything to explain. What followed was not a single explosion, but a series of them, each one uncovering the next. The way you pull one thread and discover it is connected to everything. James asked what needed explaining, and Byzasheim said nothing, and the silence itself was an explanation. And then someone at the table mentioned they had seen a woman outside earlier asking for Byzasheim by name, someone who looked remarkably like her, and James said slowly, "You told me you had no family," and Byzasheim said, "It's complicated," and James said, "Is it?" And his voice had gone completely flat, which is the most dangerous tone any voice can take. By the time Namsa appeared in the doorway, guided gently by Deli's associate, the table had already understood that something had been built on sand and was watching it shift. Bizisive looked at her sister standing in the entrance of the room she had barred her from, wearing the tired dress and the borrowed dignity, and something in her face cracked, not with guilt yet, because guilt takes longer to arrive than shame, but with the specific horror of someone watching two worlds collide that they had worked very hard to keep apart. Bizisive, Namsa said, and her voice was remarkably calm considering. I only came to see if you were real. The room was very quiet. It turns out, Namsa continued, smoothing her dress, that you are. Just not the version you told everyone about. James stood, not dramatically, but with the quiet resolution of a man who has just made a decision and intends to honor it. He looked at Bizisive for a long moment, the way you look at something you thought you understood, and then he said, I'll have someone call you a car, and walked away from the table and did not come back. Bizisive lost everything in the order people usually lose things when their constructed life collapses. First the boyfriend, then the reputation, then the invitations that stopped coming, and the calls that went unanswered, and the apartment she had been sharing on an arrangement that no longer made sense to anyone. She went back to Cape Town on a Thursday, with 2 suitcases and the particular silence of someone who has run out of performances to give. She stood at Namsa's door on a Friday morning, and Namsa opened it before she could knock, because she had seen her coming from the window and had stood there for a moment, tea in hand, watching her sister walk up the path looking like a woman who had finally put down something very heavy, too late, but down nonetheless. I'm sorry, Bizisive said. I know, Namsa said. I don't have anywhere. I know that too. They stood there at the threshold, and years passed between them in about 40 seconds. The mother who had worked herself hollow, the house that was too small for all of it, the different ways they had each decided to survive, and what those decisions had cost. Come in, Namsa said. I'll make food. Bizisive stayed 2 weeks. They did not discuss everything, because some things need time before they can be said properly without becoming weapons. But they discussed enough, sitting at the kitchen table in the mornings with the kind of honesty that only surfaces when you are tired of maintaining anything else. Why? Namsa asked her, one morning, not with anger, but with the genuine curiosity of someone who has been trying to solve the same equation for years. Why was it easier to pretend I didn't exist than to just ask me for help? Bizisive turned her cup in her hands. Because asking you for help meant admitting that you had built something and I hadn't. And I couldn't bear it. So you took what I built instead. Yes. Namsa nodded slowly. That's the part I'm still working on forgiving. I know, but I am working on it. She got up to rinse her cup. That's the best I can offer you right now. Deli called twice during those 2 weeks, and on the third call Namsa laughed at something he said and stayed on for an hour and a half, walking around her kitchen with the phone pressed to her ear, forgetting to stir the pot twice. He was steady in the way she had not known men could be steady, not performing steadiness, not making a production of his patience, simply present, consistently, the way a good foundation is present, invisible until you need it, and then absolutely everything. He came to Cape Town a month later and met her at the waterfront, and they walked for 2 hours and talked without any of the usual performances people put on when they are trying to impress someone, because they had already met on a pavement at 9:30 at night with nothing to prove and nowhere to be. And whatever that strips away, it strips away completely. You're not at all what I expected, he told her. What did you expect? Someone more careful, he said. Someone who had built more walls. I had them, Namsa said. My sister took the bricks. He laughed, and she laughed, and it was the uncomplicated kind, the kind that doesn't need any backstory. When Namsa told Bizisive, gently but without apology, that it was time for her to go and find her own footing, Bizisive looked at her for a moment and then nodded. I understand, she said. I'm not sending you away because I hate you, Namsa said. I'm sending you away because I've spent my whole life building things and handing them over. This, she gestured at the house, the kitchen, the life she had assembled piece by piece. This one I'm keeping. Bizisive picked up her bags, and at the door she turned and said, You deserved better than me. Yes, Namsa agreed kindly. I did, but you're still my sister, so call me when you've landed somewhere safe. Bizisive walked down the path, and this time Namsa did not watch from the window, because she had things to do, a life to tend to, a man on the other end of the phone who had just sent a message asking if she was free that weekend, and she was entirely free, for the first time in longer than she could remember. She and Deli were married the following spring, in a small ceremony at the waterfront, with good food and too much laughter and dancing that went until the venue staff started packing up around them. She wore flat shoes. She had learned her lesson about heels. Bizasaib sat alone in a flat in Durban that first year, smaller than any place she had lived since childhood, and she thought about everything she had taken and everything it had cost her, and concluded, without anyone to perform the conclusion for, that the accounting was not in her favor. She thought about Namsa walking 6 blocks in heels to find her, eating a bread roll and saving it, showing up at a door that was shut in her face, still calling, still trying, still choosing her, over and over, long past the point where anyone could have blamed her for stopping. She thought about all of it, and she thought about it for a long time. It is a particular kind of loneliness, regretting someone who loved you well and whom you treated like a resource, because you cannot even be angry about it, you cannot point outward. The door is locked from the inside, and you are the one holding the key, and you put yourself there, and you know it, and knowing it does not let you out. Bizasaib knew it. She sat with it. And eventually, slowly, the way things only happen when there is no one left to perform recovery for, she began the very quiet, very unglamorous work of becoming someone she could live with. Whether she managed it is another story. But Namsa was not waiting to find out. Namsa was dancing. The end.